Hello and welcome to The Home Experience, a show where we discuss movies that you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home. My name is Adam Barnard.
And I'm Jackson Smith.
And today we're going to be discussing the movie Duplicity. So welcome back to The Home Experience. It has been a little while since we've done one of these shows. I think it's fair to say a lot has gone on in our lives. It has kind of taken priority, been a huge growing experience. Excited to be back, though. I think it's been like 6, 7, 8 months ago. Eight months ago
specifically, yeah.
Since we recorded our last show. The last discussion was about the movie Velvet Buzzsaw, a satirical art world thriller horror that came out on Netflix. Also, that has a cool connection to the movie we're going to discuss today, but I know at the end of the Velvet Buzzsaw episode, we said we were going to discuss Spike Lee's Chirac. Because we took such an extended hiatus from the podcast, when we came back, we just wanted to have control over what movie we wanted to discuss first and not what we said we were going to do 8 months ago. So if anybody was really looking forward to this, if there was anybody, I apologize. I think it's fair to say we want to do this movie, to discuss the movie in the future. But for now, we just, Jackson and I, we sat down and watched Duplicity last night, and this morning it was like, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think, when we initially decided, we want to do Chirac, we were at a very different place in our lives. We're living together now. We moved in together. That was back when we were
platonically
living on different sides of LA. And since our life has gone through so much change, we kind of found that we wanted to sort of restructure this podcast to focus a lot more on movies that, we both saw, and we turned to each other and said, oh my gosh, we have to talk about that. And last night you sat me down, you're like, hey Jackson, I have this random movie to show you. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. I think I've heard of this. And we turned to each other basically right after we finished it. And we're like, oh my goodness, we have to talk about this because there's so much to talk about. And this is one of those movies that I really haven't seen too much chatter about in the 10 years since it came out. It got kind of so-so reviews and pretty much bombed at the box office. But this is a movie from a very strong filmmaker, and it's packed with a lot of really cool details, which I'm really, really excited to get into. So we were like, we got to do a podcast on this, and I'm very excited to be talking about it.
Yeah, I think the podcast for us is becoming more and more of a therapeutic device and a device of necessity, because we do have a problem. I think we talk about movies excessively to the point that everyone around us is tired of it. So I think the best shows will come out of us just watching something and feeling there is a dire need to talk about it at length. And it's great to be able to structure it into an hour-long format that we can just put out our thoughts, because this movie is one of the reasons I like it so much, and I'm very excited to get into it, is it's not dull, it's not genrefied, it's not run-of-the-mill, and it's not something that it's not something that just gets flushed out of your memory, at least not for me. I can't see that. It's such a sophisticated narrative and a sophisticated film. Love it or hate it, it makes a very strong impression, and so I guess I'm very excited to get into it too.
Yeah. And just quickly before we go into the trailer, you mentioned this a little earlier, but it is kind of funny that we are doing this film following Velvet Buzzsaw.
It is, yeah.
Because both this and that film are directed by Gilroys. That was directed by Dan Gilroy. This one is directed by Tony Gilroy. And they are both interesting movies in the respective careers of both of those artists, because they were both very, very bold, weird, kind of funny statements from directors whose previous movies had been very serious Oscar contenders.
Yeah, Nightcrawler for Dan Gilroy, which was his feature debut as a director, and then Michael Clayton for Tony Gilroy,
exactly,
which came right before this movie.
So we're going to talk too, in the podcast a lot about sort of why we think why these directors decided to make these kinds of movies for their sophomore, or I guess junior outings in the case of Dan Gilroy, but why after you've enjoyed so much success, you want to do something this weird and bold, and I would argue even kitschy to an extent. I think they're both very weird choices, but I think they're both marks of genuinely great artists.
Absolutely. So on that note, let's take a quick look at the trailer.
This wasn't an accident, was it? Being here, meeting like this.
Can you imagine living like this? How much do you think you'd need?
20 million?
I was thinking 40.
So what do you have to do to get $40 million?
I took a job in counterintelligence for Burkett and Randall. They're about to make a move. Some new product. Something big.
The very existence of this product must be carefully protected.
My God, he is gonna crush me.
It's a total corporate death match. The competition will do anything to get their hands on this.
Guess who they like for Director of Intel Operations?
You on one side, me on the other. It's perfect.
You know what I think?
I think you like the idea.
Duplicity is written and directed by Tony Gilroy. It's available to stream on Starz and to rent on Amazon, iTunes, and YouTube Movies. This film follows a pair of former government spies who move into the world of corporate espionage to mount an elaborate heist against two massive moguls. So,
Wow, mouthful.
yeah, it's a mouthful. Massive moguls. Anyway, yeah, so this is... So like we said, this movie came after Michael Clayton, which I have a confession I've actually never seen. I have heard from several people that it's really, really good, but I'm very familiar with Tony Gilroy's other projects.
All the Gilroys.
Love the Bourne movies. I really like the Jeremy Renner Bourne movie he did. That's Bourne Legacy, right?
Bourne Legacy is the fourth Bourne movie. First one without Matt Damon. He wrote and directed that one.
Exactly, yeah.
Something else that's really important to note about Tony Gilroy is he is one of a very few select, highly renowned script doctors, essentially, or fixers. I hate using the word fixer because it sounds like he beats people up, but he gets hired and paid a high weekly rate to come in and rewrite or reshoot and re-edit movies because he's known as one of the few writers in Hollywood that can just step into any room and see a project and just seem to instinctually know how to tighten up the narrative and how to give complexity and character dynamics and narrative dynamics and emotional dynamics. And I think this film very much is a raw exercise of those skills. It's something where it's like all the intricate plotting I can do and all the screenwriting tricks I know, I'm going to pack into one movie, but that movie is also going to be on a plot level utter nonsense. Like it is something that is almost a non-story and something I think got marketed as a kind of comedy, but it's actually a weird experience. That's an auteur experience, I feel like.
Yeah, this movie is very hard to classify. It is at once a romantic comedy, it's at once an espionage thriller, but it's also too low stakes to really be an espionage thriller, which kind of puts it in the realm of like an Ocean's movie, like a heist movie, but it's also not that at all. And it really is like, this is what happens when you have somebody as like massively talented as Tony Gilroy, but with such a wild imagination as Tony Gilroy, and you give him basically whatever he wants. Like he got nominated for best screenplay and best director for Michael Clayton.
Didn't he win best screenplay?
He did not win,
Oh,
but the movie was a massive hit. It was like a huge Oscar contender, and it was basically like the studio came to him and said, "You have $60 million to do whatever you want." So he was like, "I'm going to make this very, very weird little comedy crime thriller movie set in the world of corporate espionage," which is something that it's not a
solid pitch.
Well, yeah, but corporate espionage is not a thing you see in movies very often, specifically because it is such nonsense. It's like we love watching it's very petty because we like watching like James Bond and Mission Impossible movies because it's like the world is always at stake, or it feels like something's at stake.
Nuclear threat or a data breach or something that's high stakes and would affect the entire geopolitical sphere.
You know, people's lives are at stake.
Yes.
Like the characters are in constant threat of being, killed or shot. Whereas in this movie, it's like, this movie has what might be one of my favorite MacGuffins in a movie ever, because basically the whole premise is about it's about Julia Roberts and Clive Owen, who play these former CIA and MI6 agents respectively, who sort of decide to quit the world of government espionage and move into corporate espionage because they have so much more liberty over what projects they pick, and everything is so much lower stakes, and they can actually make a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically they pick these two big corporations that are kind of Johnson & Johnson-esque corporations. They're like hair products and skin cream and whatnot, but it's Paul Giamatti and Tom Wilkinson, I think, are the two corporate heads, and they are just the most insufferable petty assholes who are just like hiring all of these like super smart secret agents to like spy on each other and try and figure out what the other one is cooking up as like their next big product. And basically the inciting incident of this story is that Tom Wilkinson's company, I'm forgetting the name of his company, but his company is developing this like revolutionary product. So the whole movie is like everybody trying to find out what the product is, trying to get it for themselves so they can either like make it themselves or sell it to the highest bidder. And it's like you find out about like 2/3 of the way into the movie, it's like a cure for like male pattern baldness. And it's like it's like yeah, sure, that's revolutionary, but it's also like the stupidest thing ever. And it's like this thing that everybody is like, it's like the nuclear launch codes in a spy movie, except it's like a skin lotion. It's hysterical. This movie is very low stakes. It's very funny.
This is the kind of pitch that executives would usually react to by asking, like, have you recently had a concussion? If it was anyone other than Tony Gilroy. Like, the whole thing is, like, this movie is brilliantly structured, and it takes its MacGuffin way more seriously than any audience member could possibly take it. And I think the charm of this and the strength, which a lot of people I feel like missed or didn't like, was the fact that like it gets you so invested and it reels you in and it hooks you on a bunch of insufferable people fighting over an ostensible cure for baldness.
Yeah.
In the form of like a romantic espionage thriller with, you know, Julia Roberts is like one of the biggest stars of the 90s and the 2000s, and to have her for this role. And also I think some critics noted that like this is very different than her other roles. You know, usually she's kind of like the sweetheart from the rom-com or whatever, or the it girl. And it's like, I think she has a lot to do in this movie. I like how much autonomy and strength and kind of like how great of a puppeteer she is. Cause usually it's like the women get puppeteered and the men are like the badasses. In this case, it's like, it's kind of weird that like she's the alpha of the relationship. I feel like Clive Owen is the dick, but she's like the brains of their partnership, which is really, I mean, the character dynamics for this movie are so fun.
It's funny, we were kind of talking about this last night after we watched it, but it's interesting that like I haven't seen Michael Clayton, but I know what Michael Clayton is and sort of what it meant as a movie in the film industry at the time. And it's, you know, the gut instinct would be to follow that up with that, but better. It's like, oh, you know, you thought this was a masterpiece, just wait until you see this other masterpiece that I've got cooked up. And I feel like that's a lot of the problem with sophomore features. A lot of times as a director will always try and like outdo themselves. And what I really appreciated about this movie is that Tony Gilroy sat there and he's like, what's the most like nonsense movie I could make? Oh, it's like a romantic spy thriller about skin cream. It's like this like it's this really bizarre concept that like really looks kind of stupid on paper. And you're like, this is like a nonsense summer movie. You're so much better than this. But what I really felt his intention was to say, it's like, no. If I can do this, if I can make fluff, if I can make pure fluff and make it this thrilling, then I can do anything. And I feel like that's the kind of sophomore feature that I really like to see, is when a director says, this is my comfort zone, this is what I'm really good at, I'm going to go out of my comfort zone and make a romantic comedy and prove that I can make like the best romantic comedy ever. And I mean, I don't really remember what 2009 was like, but I think this might have been one of the best movies of 2009, but clearly it didn't resonate with people like Michael Clayton did, unfortunately. I really liked it.
Yeah. I think this entire movie is just a giant stew of Tony Gilroy catnip. Like everything that he likes, all his tricks and trades that he puts into all the other movies, or he essentially lends to other studios to just spice up their movies. It's just like this movie is one cauldron of Tony Gilroy's spice, which sounds so dirty now that I say it out loud, but too late. But yeah, and I think that's what I like. Like, you know, last night we also mentioned Rian Johnson was a filmmaker who kind of, I guess, did something a little similar, and not in the sense that he's a very big screenwriter or a big gun for hire for studios, but like he did a small movie that was his feature debut that was just off the charts well received. It was Brick. I think it's like considered one of the best movies of the 2000s and a great indie noir thriller. And then he followed it up with a studio movie and a higher budget movie, not unlike Duplicity, but one that was just like a farce in a sense. Like it was so farcical and whimsical. And I think that was also kind of well received, like a 60 something on Rotten Tomatoes. Again, very similar to this.
It did not enjoy the same success.
What do you mean, like Brothers Bloom?
Yeah,
well, both of them I think bombed, like just in a financial
but it was
sense.
like I think Rian Johnson is a very good point of reference for this because after Brick came out, it was like this guy is going to be the next big thing.
Yes. Same with Michael Clayton.
But instead of making like an amazing epic crime saga like people were probably expecting him to, he was like, I'm going to deliver this fun little quirky heist movie to prove that I can really do anything. And I feel like even despite both that and Duplicity being mediocre in their reception, I think they both served both of those filmmakers very well, because I think studio executives do look at that and they say, oh, this person is very smart. This person can handle a lot of different tones and a lot of different narrative elements and deliver something that is uniquely theirs and also just a total blast to watch. I love Brothers Bloom too. That's another movie like this where I remember seeing it and being like, this movie is utter nonsense, and yet it's so unique and has got such a specific vibe to it. It's just a blast to watch.
Yeah, and Brothers Bloom is also very subversive, very anti-genre. It has moments that are very heartfelt and has great character arcs, but there are also, there's Rachel Weisz doing like backflips or something. I don't even remember how that fit into the movie. I just know it happened, and it's such like a surreal fever dream of a movie.
Yeah.
But you come out being like, wow, that was like original and cool and weird and uniquely itself. And I think like the reason why I feel like you and I are drawn to these kinds of movies, or that we just like to discuss them, even if we don't love those kinds of movies, these passion projects, is the fact that, these are talented filmmakers who are literally given control they wouldn't otherwise have. And instead of using it for self-edification, instead of using it to make a big paycheck or to get a big summer movie or whatever, they could do whatever they want. They say like, I'm going to nakedly put myself on the line and just embrace my inner creative voice, and come up with something that is like, would just not have been pitchable if it wasn't for me in this moment having this amount of control. And to me, it's like, that's when the coolest movies come about. Not necessarily the best movies, but the coolest movies come about because you have these wickedly talented filmmakers. It's like giving a toddler the keys to the candy store. It's like, I'll have the best night of his life. It doesn't mean it's going to end well for everyone, but it's like, I just love to see that kind of just excitement. Like excitement oozes out of every scene of this film. And it's like, that's part of what makes it engaging, I think, is because you can tell it is made with such passion and excitement.
Yeah. So this movie doesn't have Rachel Weisz doing backflips, but it does have Clive Owen going on like a 2-minute monologue about frozen pizza. And I think that was like the specific moment in the movie where I was like, I'm watching something genuinely unique unfold. Because when I started, you were like, Jackson, watch this movie. I started watching it. I was like, this is very cleverly written. It's sort of like a spy versus spy type thing. Julia Roberts is like this honeypot, like seducing Clive Owen, stealing
first scene, right?
Yeah, like
very
stealing,
opening.
Sensitive, MI6 information. And then there's like, they're working but then it's like, they're working with corporations. So it's like, you're seeing spy versus spy, but in a corporate environment and corporate offices and stuff, and I'm like, that's kind of unique. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll stick with this thing. And then all of the sudden this thing starts violently jumping back and forth in time, and you realize that you're being privy to this much grander story. And then the pizza monologue hit, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am so invested in this movie. Could throw anything at me and I would be on board, because I'm like invested in the drama and invested in the characters and invested in the plot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, let's talk about structure, because you brought that up.
Right.
Like you said, the first scene, it takes place in a American consulate in Dubai. These are two people who haven't met. And we later find out, I think that actually is their first introduction.
Yes.
And, Clive Owen hits on her. They sleep together that night. And then you cut 5 years in the future. And then as the movie goes on, it fills in the gaps. It'll flash back to 2 years later, and then 1 year later, and then 6 months later. And that to me is the real narrative engine, which is that it just it shows you their meeting. It just drops you 5 years later. And for 45 minutes, it is genuinely hard to figure out what the hell is going on. And even when you think there are layers that are peeled back as the movie goes along. But what I love about this is I never once feel like I'm being screwed with for the sake of being screwed with.
Right.
And like there are some movies that are like, oh, look how clever we are. And
Exactly.
it's like and it's, it can be confusing, but it's kind of confusing to like make your brain work and to make you keep up just for the sake of, watching your fat ass get out of the couch and do mental gymnastics to figure out what is going on. And for me, it's like, no. Every single, plot reveal or narrative that is interwoven and every piece of information that is revealed should and could only be revealed at that time. And it is like this machine that slowly slots into place. And then for the last 30 minutes or the last 45 minutes, it is like just skydiving. Like it is just, I mean, you even said like you get to like the last 30 minutes, you're like, oh my God, there's 30 minutes left because everything is happening so fast. Like where could it keep going? But because of all the brilliant groundwork, I think the third act is just massively successful in what it sets out to do.
Yeah. What it is this is a movie that is very aware of what the audience knows at a given point in the movie. So it's like you start off this movie and you're like, I kind of know what's going on, and then I don't know what's going on. And then it starts jumping around and you're sort of trying to figure out sort of like, okay, they said they don't know each other when they met each other at the beginning of the movie, but they obviously do because I'm watching flashbacks of them meeting at different points in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So you're slowly sort of figuring out like, and then right at the midpoint, which is I think, again, the pizza scene, is when you really realize, oh, they're playing the long game. And you figure out that they aren't working for these two corporations, that they've sort of teamed up independently and are trying to screw them both. And that's something where the movie is aware that you're figuring that out, and it's able to play with your expectations along as to what is actually going on in that regard. And that's why I found it so engaging, is because it wasn't the kind of thing where I was like, I don't understand what's going on. It was the filmmaker telling me, you're not supposed to understand what's going on right now. That's okay. If you stick with it, things will be revealed to you. And and because of that, it engaged my imagination in a way that most other movies just don't or aren't interested in.
And what I also respect about this movie is how methodically and confidently it takes the first 15 to 20 minutes. And I saw this movie, I think the beginning of this year, probably around the time we did the Velvet Buzzsaw podcast. Actually, I might have said, gosh, I got to catch up on the Gilroy brothers movies, whatever they've directed. And I watched this, and again, like, the start, it's like, oh, this is a cute 2000s like rom-com. It's like kind of highbrow, kind of confusing. It's a little like, maybe it's a little pretentious. And then, as it unfolds, it's like, oh, I read this completely wrong. This is something different. And one of the most satisfying parts of our viewing experience last night was watching you, be intrigued by like the first few scenes, but not really be captivated. And then, just letting the movie get limber. It's like in no rush to start the race. And then as soon as it starts running, like, you're along for a ride. It's like a roller coaster that just keeps speeding up. Exactly. And I think it's like, so much of studio filmmaking is like, okay, how do we hook people here? How do we do all this? How do we put enough bells and whistles in it to make sure like we don't lose anyone's attention? And, to a fault, this movie might have just said, screw that. Yeah. Like, I'm just going to do what I need to tell the story in the best possible sense. I mean, Tony Gilroy, I think, is just a brilliant screenwriting mind. And, because of that, we get this and not a run-of-the-mill studio thriller.
Well, it's like you could have told this story in order. Like, I feel like this is this is a good, I think, reason why this movie works so well, is like you could have taken this non-linear narrative and made it linear and still got a decent spy romantic comedy heist movie, whatever the hell this thing is. You could have gotten a decent thing out of it, but because the movie is very much about like trust and mistrust and losing your footing with somebody, it was very smart to tell it in such a way to where you're not sure who the characters are until the midpoint. It's like you feel like you're in their position because you're like, I don't know who these people are. Just in the same way, these two characters don't know who the other people are. They're like, can I trust you? Can I not trust you? And in that same way, because the movie was out of order and because the movie was being told to me in this certain way, I was like, can I trust this movie? Can I not trust this movie? I don't know what I'm watching. But the moment you finally do, and the moment where it all starts coming together, is immensely gratifying. It feels like falling in love. And it's like, that's what, which is what the whole movie's about. It's about these two spies finding out that no, they actually do really jive with each other. So it's like it's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people would and did, judging by the reception, look at and be like, oh, that's too convoluted or pretentious. But I look at it and I'm like, no, there's a very specific narrative and thematic reason to move us through the story in this way. And that's why I really, really fell in love with it, you know?
And you're saying it all took off of the pizza scene.
All about the pizza scene. If you don't know what we're talking about, you got to watch the movie.
Right. I feel like this is almost just like really, really brilliant. I don't want to say trolling, but just someone having a lot of fun and knowing that they can make these kinds of jokes. Like, you know, Clive Owen and Julia Roberts are such high tier performers, and so much of this movie is just such sophisticated filmmaking. And then it's like it earns your trust so much that it can make this ongoing joke / motif about pizza, which pays off later, starting with that monologue and just reappears throughout the rest of the movie. Also, no real significance, no lesson is learned, no plot devices hidden in the pizza. The pizza never results in the characters getting what they want, but it's in there because it's funny.
And I love it because it's immensely entertaining. I want to talk about the performances for a second, because, you know, we've been talking broad strokes about the narrative and how the narrative operates and why it works really well for the movie. But not only is this a movie that works very well in the broad strokes, but it also works astonishingly well in the specifics, and specifically the casting. Like, the cast for this movie is absolutely amazing. Everybody just does an amazing job, but very specifically, and this might be the first time I've ever said this as a moviegoer, but like, Julia Roberts knocks it out of the park in this thing. I mean, like, this is a incredibly demanding, nuanced performance, and in every scene she is just killing it. It's frustrating because I feel like she hasn't done a whole lot of movies like this since then. I know she did Ben Is Back last year, which was a really, I thought, a really amazing movie and another really amazing performance, but which kind of flew under the radar. And yet she's considered to be one of America's, you know, like one of the last genuine movie stars. And watching this movie, I definitely saw why. But like, what did you think about the performances?
You know, having seen this a second time, especially, it's like, wow. The first time I actually didn't love Clive Owen. I thought he was perhaps a little miscast.
Interesting.
I don't think so anymore. Like, I think I see exactly what the character was, you know, where I think Tony Gilroy and the actor Clive Owen was trying to take the character, and I realized it was something I just didn't quite have my antenna in the right place to pick up. But coming back, you know, kind of not struggling to keep up with the plot or struggling to make sure I missed something, and, you know, second guessing all my assumptions, like just letting the movie happen and watching it, I was able to appreciate the detail and the nuance of the performances. And I think one thing, we've talked about this a little bit in the last few weeks about actors, that there are some actors that are good and they perform the scene, and that's great, and they do the scene, they hit all the emotional beats, but it almost feels a little too
bland.
Easy, a little, well, not just bland, but it feels like they knew when to hit the beats. You can almost see the gears, like, okay, here's where I shift because the scene partner is doing this. The best performances, I think, are the ones, like you've said, or you've pointed out, that people are discovering the scene. Even whether they're on take 13 and they're tired, they're still able to live in the moment and feel like they're saying the things for the first time and feeling the things for the first time. And I think a brilliant example of that, for several reasons, is this movie. One reason is just the actors are so great. You know, it's just, I just think it's a perfect pairing. But the other thing is, like, the story and the script is layered in a way that makes us wonder if they're gaming us, if they're in a game, or they're talking sincerely. And that's a recurring thing that happens that keeps things spontaneous, where you wonder, okay, you know, is this another time where they're running their, oh, they bump into each other thing, knowing people are listening, or are they actually, like, opening up? Because there are a couple times in the movie where they really open up, and I believe they weren't gaming each other. They were just very vulnerable in those moments. But, like, every time one of those comes up, I don't know if it's part of a ruse. And for the actors to play it so convincingly, that's like, they can't even tell when they're gaming each other, and that's actually a theme. They don't know when their partner is being honest. It's like this continuous, like, cycle of Inception where I'm, like, never quite sure what's going on, and just keeps, I think that's what keeps it so watchable.
It totally
is because you're just like, they don't know, you don't know, no one knows, and everything is just happening, and it feels like the movie is being made in real time versus something that was, like, honed and perfected. And I think that's why, you know, this will never be an Oscar movie, but these performances are just high tier.
She
top
did
tier.
get nominated for a Golden Globe, which is good, but I think it was an Academy Award. I think, it was an Academy Award worthy performance, specifically because of the tightrope, like you said, the tightrope walking act that is balancing what is the audience supposed to know at this point watching this movie in this specific order? What is this character supposed to be feeling, knowing all the facts about where they are and what their actual plan is? What am I supposed to be making the other character think about who I am and what my plan is? And that's like so much to juggle at once, and delivering a performance that feels humane and authentic given all of that deception is really, really hard. And yeah, I think they're both doing excellent job at it,
I think what's really weird is how much I cared for them, like how much empathy I had.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a movie where you think you're supposed to like these people, but after, like there's one great scene toward the end that's like, it borders on saccharine, but I think it lands exactly where it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Which is that they're like, you're the only person that understands me. It's like, I think towards the end of the movie, they're ready to betray each other. They're wondering like, I can't trust my partner, our relationship is going to fall apart. But it's like at the end, you realize like, no, these people are perfect for each other. And like, even though the movie has a unfortunate ending, so to speak, for the protagonist, I think it's like, it's so cool that you get to feel those things in a movie that's so based around the theme of deception.
Right. Another element too that I wanted to talk about that I really loved with this movie, which is more of a personal thing for me, but like this movie is wonderfully designed. Obviously, great costumes, great cinematography, very well shot, but like there was something about the production design in this movie that like rung very, very, very true with me as somebody who grew up in that sphere, and like knows a lot about design. Like every set feels structured in such a way as to be really conducive to the action that is demanded for that scene. Every set looks like so pretty and so well done. There's a scene where they go to Atlanta, right? Because they're trying to figure out where
Research facility.
Yeah, they go to this research facility because they're trying to figure out sort of what this cream is and where it was being developed. And they go to Atlanta, and you just like the first time we cut to a wide shot of the research facility in Atlanta, I was like, I could like feel the humidity. I mean, like my family's from Atlanta.
It's
and
atmosphere.
And I just like, it did such a subtle job of putting you in whatever space you were in. And that's the sign of great design and great filmmaking.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this movie is the fact that it pulls off such beautiful production design and showcasing of a locale, whether it's Rome or New York or whatever, but it does it without being too flashy, actually. One of the things I felt about this movie early on was that it's just not very beautiful, but then I realized it's like, oh no, it's just not very flashy. Just like, for example, the colors, like the contrast is very subtle. It's not like you need these bright lights or this aggressive color palette to showcase beauty. It's just like in Rome, like all the stucco architecture and all the beautiful back streets, they're not like ornately decorated like they are in some, idealized rom-coms. They authentically work. And then there's Cleveland as well in there, like the one location that sucks.
Yeah.
And that is specifically contrasts the intense beauty of every other set piece.
There's this whole joke in the movie, and this actually ties into the pizza thing too, where they're trying to plot they've both quit their government work. They're gonna plot their next scheme. They're gonna get rich working these corporations from an espionage level. And Clive Owen's like, there are these two competing frozen pizza companies, and he's like, I've got it all planned out. It's like, this is going to be great. And Julia Roberts, her character, Claire, I think her name is, she's just like, well, no, I'm going to New York. It's like, I'm going to New York to do this other thing. And it's like this it's like this kind of sad scene where they realize they're like on different pages and they might have different priorities. And then she's like, where's the frozen pizza gig? And he's like, Cleveland. Of course, you cut back to the main narrative, a year in the future or, in the present. And then the next flashback you get is Clive Owen working the pizza job in Cleveland. And it's like the first time in this entire movie, which has been set in New York in all these beautiful corporate offices and giant luxurious apartments and hotels. It's the first time you're just like in this super dingy apartment complex. And it's like, it's It's Cleveland. This is what happens when he didn't go with Julia Roberts, didn't follow Julia Roberts to New York, and didn't do the thing that he should have done. And now he's like stuck in this crappy ass apartment in Cleveland. And it was like this very, very subtle design and location choice that really put you in his mental state and made you feel like, oh, I traded down, didn't I? And then like he opens the door and Claire is in there with like a bottle of wine, and you're just like, yes, they're getting back together. They're going to go to New York. And it's like the design is doing a lot of storytelling work. And it's like sometimes you see that in Hollywood movies, but like you said, a lot of times the priority is prettiness.
Yeah.
And you don't allow a space to be dirty when it needs to be. And I felt like this movie gave itself that freedom.
Tony Gilroy, I think one of his strengths is he brings authenticity, or he just brings worldly wisdom to his movies. Even the Bourne movies, even ridiculous movies that he has a hand in, he finds a way to say, no, I'm going to add just enough realism to ground it, and then, we can be as fantastical as we want, because it's like people can recognize the world we're in. And again, it's like, this is what makes him a good director and not just a good writer, because the screenplay, as we've discussed, is immaculately written.
Amazing.
I almost don't have any complaints about it.
Yeah.
But it would be very easy for a screenwriter this good to be a mediocre, B-list director. And Tony Gilroy is an A-list director, and he makes it very clear that Michael Clayton wasn't an accident just by how well he assembles the elements in this movie.
Yeah. No, it's style with a purpose.
Yeah.
It's not just pretty for the sake of being pretty. It's pretty because these corporations have a lot of money, and this is what their offices look like when they've got a lot of money. But it's also just like incredibly, gorgeous and fun to look at in the way that a lot of really classic Hollywood movies are. Like this movie feels very Hitchcock in a lot of ways.
How so? You
Like
said
just,
that, but I'm
it's
not
you know
sure
just in the playfulness of the action. I feel like
Okay.
I'm talking specifically about like stuff like To Catch a Thief and North by Northwest. Obviously, this movie is leagues away from Psycho, but like you talk about like a lot of Hitchcock's like big lavish Hollywood movies, and there was an element of wit to the way the shots were composed and the way sets were built and the way we moved about spaces and like the way characters bounced and played off each other. It's like this movie was like a much funnier, lower stakes Hitchcock movie, and that's part of the reason I was jiving with it so hard.
So let's quickly talk about the ending before we wrap up the discussion, because this movie, despite being very unconventional, feels like it's leading up to an ending, or just a kind of ending that you as an audience member think you know, or think you're smart enough to know. And I don't know if you saw the ending coming, or because I certainly didn't the first time, or it starts to go the way I thought, and then it just for the last 20 minutes turns into something, or last 15 minutes turns into something very different. And it kind of makes it a bit of a different movie that says something different. It changes almost like the theme and the statement about the characters in the world. So as someone who just saw the movie for the first time last night and hasn't had 9 months to stew on it, what did you think about the ending?
Yeah, well, on paper, it is a traditional heist movie ending in the sense where you basically you realize that somebody else has been playing an even longer game, and that they've duped all of these other characters, and that something else has been going on this whole time. And it's a very twisty twist ending. But it's also, it allows the movie to end on a note that's like somber, which is interesting, because it's like, I think up till now, this movie, had been a very, very well done and very sophisticated, nonsense Hollywood movie. It was like, oh, these two very attractive people are in love with each other and they're going to get a lot of money and live happily ever after. And that's the ending you think you're building towards. And then you realize, nope, they've been being played this whole time. And they've been being played by one of the corporate heads, because this guy has even more money and more power and more wisdom than them to outsmart them. And it ends, and they basically they're free of all of it, but they've gotten nothing. And you end with this shot of them just like in this empty ballroom, just this slow camera pan back when you realize like these two characters are left with nothing but each other. And it's like melancholy, because at the same time you're like, oh, they've been fighting to like love and understand each other and trust each other the whole movie. So in a way they have succeeded, but they've also gotten totally played, and they're not walking away from this with any of the money that they thought that, and any of the money or success that they thought they would. And it's interesting because it's, you know, this movie keeps telling you over and over again, like, this is going to be that kind of movie. And then it ends up being, dare I say, a little bit of a commentary on how like actual corporations are and how scary brilliant these people can be when when you are given access to unlimited money and power and resources. So it's so I kind of get why the audience and critic reception of this movie was a little mixed, because it ends on a note where you're like, oh, well, as
like,
opposed to like the euphoria that you feel watching the rest of the movie.
There's a hint of nihilism in it, right?
Yeah.
Because like part of what I loved about movies of the 2000s, even run-of-the-mill studio movies, is I would, you know, have my issues or whatever, growing up, just hate the world, be angry, be stressed, be angsty. You go see a movie, boy meets girl, girl and boy spy, they go to exotic locations, they pull it off, you know, by the skin of their teeth. Then you kind of walk out with a spring in your step.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that'd be cool. Like that was fun. Like, I wonder if that's real. Like maybe I can do that. Maybe I can be a spy when I grow up. And there's a romanticism that would happen in a lot of those movies.
Exactly.
Like even just the bad ones, like The Bounty Hunter, or just some like stupid like 2000s rom-coms. Like I love.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
At the time, and it's like this movie. I think the problem is it was just enough of that. It was just enough of a 2000s movie that was like, you're kind of like, how is this world going to handle them having the cure for baldness? And like the final shot is gonna be of them on their own private island because they made 40 million, and they're gonna, you know,
helicopter shot,
exactly.
on a yacht, like roll credits.
Like we can pretty much just painted the scene right now.
Exactly.
And it is still that scene, but in an empty ballroom where it's like there's this bittersweet relationship victory, but a complete failure of their espionage careers. Like it's like these are people who are older, they were looking to retire, and now it's like they're probably just dead broke, and they are now going to get a bad reputation around town. It's like one of the few movies like this I want to see a sequel for, because I'm almost like, what happens to them? And it's so it's like I only think I realized that last night. I thought it was maybe I didn't really realize the commentary that is inherently in that ending the first time I watched. I think you kind of pointed that out to me, but you're right. It just works as both fulfilling expectations and completely subverting them.
I think it was ahead of its time in that regard. Like
Probably.
I think Tony Gilroy is very, very smart when it comes to genre and playing with expectations and telling a story that is not just entertaining and fun, but also like compelling and true. And I think people went into this movie expecting it to be full on fluff, and it is fluff for it's great fluff for the vast majority of the runtime, but then you get to the end and he actually is landing on a slightly more nuanced and mature statement about something, and I think people were very off-put by that. I think that's very popular nowadays. I think nowadays people have a real thirst for content that makes them think and like makes them confront elements of our society, like, you know, corporations or capitalism or what have you, that
people are angry about.
You're like, people are like, it's at the end of the day, I feel like this movie was a lot angrier than I think people were expecting it to be, because Tony Gilroy is probably a very angry person. And I think something like that would have really thrived now, which is why I'm really happy we're doing this podcast and talking about this movie, because I'm like, I think revisiting this movie with a, you know, 2010s mindset is
end of the decade
mindset makes it a hell of a lot more enjoyable than it was probably back in 2009. I mean, I said this too, that like I feel like this is the kind of movie that if I saw when it initially came out, I wouldn't have liked. Like I would have agreed with the critics and audience consensus. It got like a C cinema score. Like I would have been like, I didn't understand any of that, and the parts of that I did understand, I didn't really like. I'm gonna go see The Bounty Hunter, you know, like you know. And now I'm like, you know, now that I've done some growing and Donald Trump is president, and you know, yada 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 yada. I watched this movie and I'm like, I feel sort of a righteous indignation at the end that is not as like surface level gratifying as watching good fluff, but is a lot more like gratifying as a moviegoer. Like that last shot is so poetic and so mature in a way that you just never ever see in this kind of movie. You don't see that in an Ocean's movie. You don't see that in any normal spy movie. It's like, it's always the helicopter shot on the yacht, and it's like never this shot where there's like visual poetry and symbolism and metaphor and meaning, and commentary going on. It's just it's really cool.
I'll tell you what, as a 24-year-old now and not a 14-year-old when this movie came out, I much more deeply resonate with that shot from pulling out of an empty ballroom than I do with a shot pulling out of a yacht.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you which one is much more close to reality. It's the one from Duplicity.
Exactly.
And I'm only 24, guys. I have decades left of disappointment to go, and I already feel this way. So I know it's a very strong and insightful movie.
It's the thing. It's like in the battle against corporations, it's hard to win. It's like in
the corporation always wins.
Yeah, it's like in the battle against like late stage capitalism, it's hard to pull a victory because these people know how to outsmart even the smartest people, and that's a very scary thought. And I think that the movie sort of ends up saying that about itself is really cool, and just proof that Tony Gilroy is not just a really, really good filmmaker, but probably like a great one.
And so I guess we can look forward to his Star Wars series now, which he has gone on record to say he hates the franchise. So that's up next for Tony Gilroy.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the future, though, he can convince Netflix to give him $60 million to make something like this again, because I think he is really at probably the prime of his career. Like he's so wise as a filmmaker, and I'm sure, knowing that we're now in 2019 and not 2009, I'm sure he'd have a lot of interesting things to say about the world were he given an opportunity to just be unleashed and make a movie about kind of the world we live in right now.
Obviously, we both love this movie. What would you give this movie as a rating?
4.5 out of 5.
4.5 out of 5.
Yeah,
I'm gonna agree. Yeah, I'm gonna say 4.5 out of 5 too. Yeah.
I was like, I can't really necessarily find a flaw. Like, if I'm to dock one point, I feel like I should have a reason or a metric why. It's something where it's like maybe it'll get bumped up to a 5 out of 5. I can't give it the perfect movie score right now because it's such a treasured, reverent score in my opinion. But this movie is, I think, a near perfect version of itself, and like I wildly enjoyed it even more the second time than the first time.
It was originally a 4 out of 5 for me when I initially saw it last night, because I did like the end twist is. It is very convoluted, and there was an element of suspension of disbelief that I was like, at best I was like, I should go back and rewatch this again, having this in mind, knowing that this is what has been actually going on this whole movie, just to see if it all checks out. But then, like, the more and more I thought about that last shot, and the more and more I thought about that ending and the note that the movie landed on, I was all like, I just got to the point where I was like, I almost really don't care how convoluted it is, because I really appreciate that it decided to land on a more mature and more artistic statement than just they lived happily ever after. And I love the specificity of what that statement was. And even if the getting there was a little convoluted, I felt very rewarded as a moviegoer, as me personally. So yeah, I would say 4.5 stars.
So let us know what you thought of the movie in the comments section below, or if you're listening to this on a podcast app, you can let us know at Real Screen Fever on Twitter. Very curious to see who out there has seen it. Maybe they saw it when it came out. Maybe they're catching it on Stars more recently. It's just not a movie that's talked about much. I think that's part of what's exciting about this and what we're moving toward, is that we just want to talk about stuff that just really lights a fire under our asses creatively and artistically and activates our imagination, whether that be Star Wars, which it definitely does for both of us, or whether it's a movie from 2009 by Tony Gilroy that no one saw. Yeah. And so I think that's what's exciting. I had a blast doing this. I'm so happy to be talking about movies again.
Me too. So stay posted for more updates on the channel. I'm going to be releasing another short film that I did in college called The Chocolate Soldier in the next couple of weeks. Very, very proud of it. Very, very excited to show it to you guys. I hope you all really like it. Once again, I'm Jackson.
And I'm Adam.
And we'll see you next time.